With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Lamed Gimel. We left off on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, 9 lines from the top of the Amid, just to share something that when we learned the last din yesterday, Tanach Rabbanan Yafshu Roiv Olav, that if the leaves of the Hadassim became dried out, as long as the 3 ones on the top are moist, then that Hadas is kosher, and we need to have the minimum of 3 hadassim, so we need to have at least 3 hadassim that have at least 3 of the top leaves that are moist. Just going back to the Sfiras over here, it fits that the 3 top are Chabad, and being, as we learn in Chassidus, that all of the midos, the lachluchias, ultimately are born from Moichin, it's Ava'im. So if there's lachluchias in one's Isbainanus, then there's nothing to worry about, even if temporarily the midos are so to say dried out, but that's going to remain and be a kosher hadas. Now in today's daf, we're going to speak about a topic that comes up every now and then. It's the topic of dichui. Dichui means rejection or permanent rejection. This is primarily a sugya that we have in Kachim, that there are many times that an animal becomes rejected for it being okay to be used for Kachim, and there are times that we say that hoyel v'nitcha nitcha, meaning once something is rejected, it remains permanently rejected. Really in Kachim we learned the difference between if something was never fit to begin with, it's called dichui me'ikara, and then there is a concept which is nira v'nitcha. If something was fit and then it became a blemish, then it became problematic, there it's actually even easier to say that since it was nira and it's no longer, it remains permanently rejected. Now today, Sukah Daf Lamed Gimel is going to be questioning whether we bring this whole sugya of dichui to mitzvahs. Yesh dichui etzel mitzvahs or not. We're going to have the shita of Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, unlike what we had in the Mishnah yesterday in the Amud Beis, that if a hadas has more berries than leaves, the Mishnah says the hadas is not kosher. However, this is not a problem that is unfixable. You can decrease, you can take away at least some of the berries, making sure that there are more leaves than berries. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says that this is not something that you are allowed to do on Yantiv, ve'ein mematim beyantiv, and as we explained, that is connected to the rabbinic prohibition of being misakin a keli. You cannot fix a utensil, you cannot make something fit. However, the Tanach Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon holds that a person lechatchila is allowed to decrease the berries on Yom Tiv. You're being mesakin keli, so we're going to go into the davar she'ein eschavin, we're going to go back into the psik reisha, and with many other amazing nuances. The final sugya before the new Mishnah will be what happens if the bundle, if the eged of the lulav hadas and arava comes apart on Yom Tiv. In other words, can you rebundle it? Now really, as we already learned various times, there is a machlokes tanoim whether you need to have this bundling or whether not. So if you do need to do it, how would you do it on Yom Tiv? And then on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, we're going to continue in the series of the Arba Minim. We're going to begin learning about the Arava, the willow stem. The Mishnah again is going to be very consistent with the way it's formulating, that if the Arava is guzzle, or if it's yavesh, then it's not kosher. We're going to have actually a Gevaldik Din that even though the Torah refers to the willow as Arvei Nachal, which means willows that grows on a Nachal, on a brook by water, so Chazal understand that it doesn't mean that it must grow at a body of water. Even if it grows out in a field or on a mountain, it's going to be equally kosher. And the Torah's usage of Arvei Nachal, one of the ways Chazal understand it is that the leaf must be elongated and not rounded, like a stream of water that's narrow relatively and extremely long. And Chevra, many, many more beautiful dinim. Again, let us start on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, all the way in the beginning of the line, 9 lines from the top of the Amid, when the Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis. That's the Mishnah of Hadas. The Mishnah said that if Niktam Roishoi, if the top of the hadas is clipped off, we're not speaking about the leaves, we're speaking specifically about the stem. So then the Mishnah said that this hadas is not valid. Okay. Okay, now what we began to already understand is that there are two types of invalidations when it comes to the Arbas Haminim. There is something that makes that inherently invalid, and then you have an issue of hadar. If you need to have beauty, that something might theoretically be valid, but it's lacking in its beauty. And if the issue is only because of hadar, as we continuously will see, it's considered a lesser of a problem. Koydem kol, just to quickly repeat that we had a way of understanding the Gemara on the Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, that if you live in a place where Bachlal no one has a lulav, even if your lulav is dried out, it's not even lacking in beauty. Because beauty is subjective. If no one else has anything, and thus is the shens the lulav, it's considered a beautiful lulav. Similarly, over here, the Gemara understands that the psul of niktam roishay is not because it becomes inherently invalid. It's only because it lacks in its beauty. So it's a rectifiable psul. And indeed, Tanei Ula Barchinana taught the following braisa, that if niktam roishay taka, the top is clipped off, but also by tomorrow. I know the word tomorrow means a date, but what you have on the hadas stems is you have these types of green, so to say, dates that can grow out of the stem. You know what's amazing? It can grow out of the stem even after it's cut off the ground. There's enough lachluchias in the branch itself that sometimes mamish, when it's going to be on already in your lulav, as we'll see in a moment. Sometimes this green bud, or what the Gemara calls, what Chazal calls a timara, a date-like berry, if it grows mamish on the top like a crown, so it covers up the clipped, the broken, the severed top, then that hadas goes back to being kosher. And as many Rishonim point out, because since the psul of niktam roishay is only a psul of hidur, and it only lacks beauty because, it's broken at the top. If it's covered, cover up, but it's a nice cover. There's a crown, there's a tamara. It becomes muhudar, it becomes beautiful, and it goes back to it being a kosher hadas. Okay, and now the question will be, I see a lot of pictures from Kavan, I just don't see a hadas. I see a lot of tamaras. But let's go weiter. Okay, let's go. If before Yom Tiv, the top of the hadas was clipped off, and then also by tamara be Yom Tiv, it sprouted this date on Yom Tiv. Now that also means, let's just make it clear, that you, as we learn, will bind your lulav and the hadas and the arava prior to Yom Tiv. And we're going to learn this today, God willing, on Amid Beis. That's particularly true if we follow those who hold that a lulav must be bound together, must be bundled, and therefore, at least lechatchila, you must properly knot it together. Well, making a knot, guys, remember, B'chlal on Shabbos on Yom Tiv is in itself problematic. So you bundled it before Yom Tiv. So what happens if when you bundled it, the hadas was not kosher? After it's bundled together, it's already on Yom Tiv. Now this tamara grew on top of your hadas. Is that a kosher lulav or not? What is this question dependent upon? Says the Gemara, asks Rabbi Yirmiyah, Yesh dichoy eitzel mitzvahs oiloi. Do we say the concept that we find in Kachim of permanent rejection? It's the hadas. Meileh, if the hadas was problematic prior to the zman of the chiyuv, as we'll develop in the sugya, that's a whole different topic. But if the time of the obligation already came, and furthermore, you already bound the lulav hadas and arava, and if you remember what we learned in the first two parakim, this whole concept of tasev v'loy min ha'asui, as the Gemara is going to speak out in a moment. So when you bound it together, when Yom Tov came in, it was not kosher. Now the problem resolved itself, but if we will apply the rule of dichoy, once something was rejected, it remains rejected, then you will not be allowed to use that bundle. And Rabbi Yirmiyah did not know. And the Gemara is wondering, why didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah know? Fragt the Gemara why didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah know whether we say dichoy? Like everyone agrees, the concept of dichoy by kachim. that we say this by mitzvahs, why doesn't he learn it? Why doesn't he understand it from the following Mishnah? From that, what Mahad Tanana, Mishnah and Chulin, the Mishnah there is speaking about the mitzvah of covering the blood of a chaya that was slaughtered, or of a bird that was slaughtered. And what happens, case number one, kiso, if the person fulfilled the mitzvah by covering the dam, and then vinizgala, it became exposed, doesn't matter how. So first of all, the Mishnah tells us that once the person was mekayim the mitzvah, he's not going to be obligated to do it again. In other words, it's not that the cheftza of the dam must be covered. It's that the person, the gavra, must cover the blood. If you fulfilled your mitzvah, pater melachasos again. Next case in the Mishnah, but if you never fulfilled your mitzvah, why not? Because kiso haruach, the wind blew sand over the dam. So says the Mishnah, you are obligated to cover it. And as we'll see in a moment, hold on, if it's already covered, how could you cover it? So let's clarify. And on that, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that lo yishanu, that you're chayev l'chasois elo shechazar v'nizgala, only if the dam became exposed. So you never fulfilled your obligation before you couldn't do it, because it was already covered. Now that the wind blew the sand away and now the blood is exposed again, so you're mechuyev to cover it. Aval loy chazer v'nizgalam pater melachasos. In other words, but if it remains covered, we're not telling you you have to expose it to cover it. No, it's once the dam, as long as the dam is covered, there is no mitzvah. Now we got a problem. If you're telling me that once the dam is covered, even though a person didn't do it, there is no mitzvah to cover it, if we would say that there is dichui by mitzvahs, then even if later the wind uncovered it, exposed it, once the mitzvah was already nitcha, if we would subscribe to permanent rejection, then you should never be chayiv. As we asked over there in Chulin, v'havin and ba, well, if that's the case, ki chazav v'nezgala may chayiv l'chasos, why don't we say hoyel v'itchei itchi? And to answer that question, said Rav Papa in Chulin, indeed, that is one of the things we learn from the Mishnah. Zoi soy meres, that ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. Yes, there's a concept of permanent rejection by kachim, but we do not apply it to mitzvahs. So the Gemara is really asking a question on Rabbi Yirmiyah, just like Rav Papa. Taka made a great diuk from the Mishnah and Chulin, and he came to the certain conclusion that ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. Why didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah know of that Mishnah and Chulin? Why does he have a boya? So the Gemara tells you that don't think that Rav Papa was certain that ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. Maybe Rav Papa, my friends, had a suffix. And you know what happens, B'chlal, when a Yid has a doubt? We're machmir. And let's appreciate that the application of ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs over there in Chulin brings about a chumrah. Right? Because if you say dichoy, then you'll never be chayiv to cover the dam. If you say that ein dichoy, then if the wind exposes it, then you do have to cover it. If we're going to say ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs over here in our question, by that hadas that later during Yontav grew that date, you're going to make that lulav into a kosher bundle. Fakert. If you want to be machman on both sides, then your taka won't be consistent. And therefore, again, the Gemara answers the Gemara, don't think that Rav Papa knew for sure ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs. Maybe that Rav Papa go from a bayalei. Rav Papa had the following question inside of his head, inside of his heart. That what do we say when he learned the Mishnah and Chulin? That it's nifshat pashat lei, that the Tana is certain, not a doubt, taka that ein dichoy eitzel mitzvahs, which is why he says that if the wind exposed the dam, you are chayiv to cover it, because we don't say the mitzvah was rejected, but that's a certainty, and therefore he would apply it here by lulav as well, even though here by lulav it brings about a leniency, it will allow you to use that hadas, or maybe, this is even within Rav Papa, that the Tana was never certain whether we say dichoy by mitzvahs or not. It remains a doubt. Sapukim is sapkelei. So therefore, therefore, what happens when you have a doubt? You have to be machmer. And Taka, that explains also the Mishnah in Chulin, why the Tana says that if that blood becomes exposed, you're chayiv to cover it, because it's l'chumra. L'chumra, we're going to say, ein dichui. Over here, if we're going to say ein dichui, then it's going to bring about the leniency of you being allowed to use the hadas. But l'kula lo yamrinon. So not only does Rabbi Yirmiyah have a boya, the Gemara argues that Rav Papa also didn't know. Okay, and now that we pointed out that we don't find the resolution from the Mishnah and Chulin, the Gemara says that Teiku, this question of yesh dichui or ein dichui by mitzvahs, stands.
Meaning there's no solution.
Meaning the Gemara doesn't have a solution. Now, we're not done yet. Now says the Gemara, maybe this is really the underlying pshat question in the following machloikes tanoim, and now we're coming back, my friends, to the din of a hadas. As we learned in the Mishnah, that if a hadas has more berries than leaves, as we will define more soon, then the hadas is not kosher. But again, it's a psul that is rectifiable. Simply pick the berries off, right? Decrease the amount of berries. And on top of that, the Mishnah said that don't do it on Yom Tiv. Now says the Braisa, what happens if avar ula katan, if someone violated this rabbinic tikkun mana, and they did decrease the berries on Yom Tiv, says the Mishnah, says the Braisa, pasul, the hadas remains pasul, so holds Rabbi Elazar ben Yehoid Tzadok. However, the Chachamim are machshirim. Now, why is this machlokes? What's the suggestion? Why do we understand this to be the machlokes, whether yesh dichui or ein dichui? So says the Gemara that the ones who made that suggestion must have held savarua. There are really other issues that could be involved, but they did not link it, because they hold the kula alma, lulav ein sarach eged. Now, this question of whether you must bundle the lulav or not, as we'll explain in a moment, is very much connected to this braisa, or it could be connected to this braisa. And let me just say this by heart. And we already had this above. What did we learn above? That when it comes to the making of a sukkah, we also had the same din when it comes to the making of a tzitzis. That if the sukkah is invalid, and you resolve the invalidation like you had the schach already on top of the sukkah, but it was connected to the ground, and then all you did is you disconnected, you uprooted the schach. So we had a machlokes whether that's good or not. But why would it not be good? Because the Torah says Chag HaSukkah is tasa. That means that you must make it kosher. If when it was made it wasn't kosher, then something else happened, so to say, and now it's made already in a kosher way, that's not good enough. Tasa v'lo min ha'asui. Now you can argue the same thing is over here. How is it linked over here? So the Gemara says that the people who made this link hold that both of these Tanoim hold lulav doesn't need to be made. There's no making by a lulav. What's the making of a lulav? The binding of the lulav with the other two. Lulav, hadas, and arav. And even if they were to describe that you have to tzarech eged, now this is a machlekes really between everyone and Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda is the one that holds that tzarech eged. So therefore you would argue, hold on, you know why the bundle is not okay? Even though you decreased it on Yom Tiv, because when you bound it, it wasn't kosher. Now that you took the berries, it's already bound. That is only a problem if you would apply the issue of tasa v'lo min ha'asui to the lulav. Who says you apply that? The Torah doesn't use the word tasa when it comes to the binding of the lulav. The Torah says the word tasa only when it comes to the making of the sukkah. So again, even if tzarech eged, you have to actually bind it. But everyone holds lo yalfin and lulav misukah. It's only by the sukkah, the chsiv ba, tasa, and Chazal learn v'lo min ha'asui. You may not use that which was already made. Okay, so if that's the case, if there is no issue of tasa v'lo min ha'asui, then the only rationale behind the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yehoid Tzadok and the Chachamim will be this: my lav ha'kamifligi. That the man, the pasul, even though you decreased it on Yom Tiv, it remains pasul. Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Tzadok, because he holds yesh dichoy etzel mitzvahs. In other words, since when Yom Tov came in, this hadas was invalid. Why was it invalid? Because it had too many berries. Even though now you made it valid, it's too late. So 1 second. So when we learned in the Mishnah that if you are memayit, it's kosher. Of course, if you are memayit it before Yom Tov, before the time of the mitzvah, as the Gemara is going to elaborate later. But once the zman of the chiyuv came in, and now you resolved it, it's too late. It was already nitche, it was already rejected. Uman the machshin and the chachamim in this brayso will hold that lo yomrin and yesh dichoy etzel mitzvahs. The concept of dichoy is only applied by kachim. And that's why they would hold that even though taka, you, the person, should not violate tikkun mana midrabanan, but that's a rabbinic violation. And if we already spoke out that this whole concept of a mitzvah baba aveda doesn't even apply to a rabbinic violation.
Well, I can ask, why don't we make a big deal about taking the berries out on Yom Tov? Why is that not a big deal?
No, it's a big deal, but once you violated that, then it remains kosher.
Why does it remain kosher even though you violated it?
Because like we just spoke at least shitas toisvus is that a mitzvah hababa aveda doesn't apply to a rabbinic avedis. And the taking off the berries once the hadas is not connected to the ground is not a biblical violation. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, that could be one way of understanding their machlokes, but that's not necessarily true. Loi, I can counter argue that the kula alma lo yomrin yesh dichoy etzel mitzvahs. What's the question? The machlokes is whether we compare a lulav to a sukkah, and especially as we just learned shitas Rashi that from the Yud Gimel Midah is the only Midah that Adam Doirish Ma'atzvah is a Kal V'chaymer. To make your own hekesh, you don't do that. So Mar Savar, Rabbi Lazar, but Rabbi Yotzadek, he had a tradition that we learn lulav from Sukah. In other words, the lulav bundle requires making. If it requires making, and when you made it, any one of the three were not kosher, even though you resolved it later, not because of dichoy. It's already made. That's why it's invalid. And Omar Savar, lo yalfin and lulav misukah. That's another way. And the Iba Yisema, I'll give you a third way of explaining the machlokes, that is fidolan lulav tzarech eged. If both of these Tanoim, that means the Chachamim and Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yotzadek would hold that you have to make a bundle, that you have to bundle it, then the Kol Alma Yafin and Lulav Misukah, we would compare and we would apply the din of Tasav Elohim and Asui. What is the Machlokes Tanoim? V'acheb lulav tzarech eged kol mifligim. And that this final statement we know is already a Machlokes Tanoim. So instead of adding arguments amongst the Tanoim, whether yesh dichoy etzel mitzvahs or ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs, it's b'chlal, it's better. We try to minimize the amount of arguments we have. If we already know there is such an argument, let's extend it and explain other machlokes and connect it to this one argument. And where do we find the machlokes? Whether you must bundle the lulav or not. So I know that we quoted this above, but this is the headquarters. This is ground zero regarding bundling a lulav. De Tanya, lulav, bein agud, whether it's bound together with the hadas and the arava. Bein she'enay agud, kasher. However, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, no, agud kosher, she'ena yagid pasul. It's ma'akev. Now, why would it be ma'akev? So, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara that he has Gzeira Shava lekicha from agudas ezoif. Now, we mentioned not that long ago that we have 4 times in the Torah a mitzvah that's connected to the hisap plant, to the ezoif plant. And one was a one-time mitzvah that we needed to do when we were in Mitzrayim. Pesach Mitzrayim. That the dam of the Pesach, as it's written explicitly, and as we have in the oral Torah, together with the dam milah, needed to be put on the doorposts that people are aware of, but we did not put it by throwing it, we did not use our finger. The Torah says that we needed to take a bundle of hisap, dip it into the blood, and smear it on the mezuzahs and the mashkoif. And it says over here, by Emoid, by Lulav, Ulakachtem Lachem Bayem Arishan. And it says over there, again, this is in Parshas Boy, Ulakachtem Agudas Ezoif. Now, regarding the amount of hisab that was taken, the Torah says, a aguda, a bundle, Malahalan, the Torah writes, a bundle, Afkan. When the Torah says, take for yourself a lulav, it means a bundle. And no, not a bundle, many lulavim. No, a bundle means, as we know, that 3 of the 4, the lulav and the hadas and the arava, they are bundled together. V'rabanan, They never received from their Rebbe such a Gzeira Shava of Lekicha. And that's going to be the third suggestion of how to understand the Machlokes, whether if you decrease the berries over Yom Tiv, whether it remains invalid or whether you validated the mitzvah. Guys, one thing is clear, At Kan, so far we did not resolve the boy of Rabbi Yirmiyah, whether Dichui, the concept of permanent rejection, is used by mitzvahs or whether it remains only a kachem topic and we don't say it by mitzvahs. Now, says the Gemara, Man Rabbanon. Now that we quoted the Machlokes regarding whether a lulav needs egad or not, who is the author of the following Braisa? The Braisa writes, Lulav mitzvah lo oigdoi. It's ideal. It's better. It's like a lachatchila dikadin. Ve'im lo yagdoi. Then it's kosher. Now, one second. Who was the author? If the author would have been Rabbi Yehuda has the Gzeira Shava. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not a psalachatchila dekadin. You must make it into a bundle. Kiloi ogdoya mai kosher. And if it's going to be the Rabbanan, we just read the Braisa. The Rabbanan say lulav bein agud bein she'en agud discussion. I Rabbanan mai ve'im lo yagdei kosher mai mitzvah ka'avid. Why is it even an ideal? Says the Gemara, hold on. This Braisa is authored by the Rabbanan, and they don't have the Gzeira Shava. However, why do they hold that lechatchila you should bundle the lulav u mitzvah mishum zekei levian ve'um? And there's a mitzvah in general to beautify the mitzvahs, especially as we learned in Chassidus. That beauty is connected to diversity, right? To different colors put together, tiferes. And as we also understand how each one of the species, and we have all these midrashim that people are familiar with, they represent different types of Eden, and the beauty of the Jewish people is dafka when the diverse types of people all are bundled, are all united, are all gathered together. And here clearly we see that the Zek Levi Anveyo is only a din of lachatchila, not of b'di'evid. This is just making stronger, just pointing out the kasha that we spoke out, that in the beginning of the Perek, when Rashi wrote that the reason why a lulav yavesh, Rashi wrote, is because Zekei Levian Veyu, that was the problem that Tosfos had with Rashi. That how can Rashi connect the lulav hayavesh with Zekei Levian Veyu when we know that it's only a din of lechatchila? Tosfos learned pshat, it's connected to the din of hadar, which is uniquely a din by the arbas minim, certainly by the esrog. And we also explained that even l'shitas Rashi, zekei levianveyo isn't always only a lachatchila. It must be that sometimes it's only a din of lachatchila and sometimes it's a din that's ma'akev. Okay. Back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if the berries are more merubin than the leaves, then the hadas is not kosher. So Amar Rav Chizda, version number 1. Davar zeh, the following statement, Rabbeinu Hagadol Amra, the great Rebbe said that he's referring to Rav, who was the teacher. Even though he was, right, Rav Chizda I think came after Rav Huna, but still he was, the Mamala Makim over there in Surah, and the great Rabbeinu Hagadol, the Alter Rebbe there was the Rav. And the moment he mentioned Rav, right, Chassidim say, Zol gesund sein, Ubenusach Hagamara Hamakim Yeh be'ezroig, may God help him. That what? The last line in the Amit. That Lo Shanu. When did we learn that the hadas is not kosher because there are too many berries? Is only if the berries are in one place. They are concentrated b'makim echad. Okay. However, and you compare the amount of berries in one place to the leaves that are spread out. That is where we say there's so many berries, it's invalid. But if the berries are spread out in 2 or 3 places, and for sure more, even if you were to count the berries and there would be more berries than leaves, since it's spread out, then it's kosher. So says Rab Chizda, or that's the current version. And now says the Gemara, Omar Rava. So Rava says, that's questioning that version, Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, Shnayim Ushloisha Mekoimos, if the berries are spread out throughout the stem, then there is another problem with the hadas. How can Rav have said that it's kosher? Why won't we call this a speckled hadas? Speckled in a derogatory way. Have a menumer. And again, menumer l'choira is a problem in Hidur, again, which is why if you mi'aton before Yom Tiv, it's going to be kosher. And because of this, we revise that which Rav Chizda said. Ela i'itmer ha'cha'itmer. That when it says in our Mishnah, that if there are berries, more berries than leaves, Mishnah says puzzle. And now that's the correct quote. The following was said by the great Rebbe. And God, that's Rav, and God help him. It's not about where the berries are, but it's about the color of the berries. That if the berries are black, just to know that the berries, when they sprout out, they are green. And as time goes on, they become blackened. So black berries take away. We have a picture here of blueberries, but beseder. But if there would be, I don't see ahadas, I see gavaldika blueberries, but that's fine. If the berries are black, that is when the hadas is disqualified. Aval anov of yerukos or yeroikos, if the berries are still green, which is as they look when they come out, mine the hadas that it's part of the hadas and it remains kosher. In other words, what Rav introduced is that there is nothing inherently wrong with the berries. We want for the hadas again to be hadar, to be mohudar, to be beautiful. And it is the black speckling that takes away the beauty of the hadas. As long as it remains green, you are good. Amar Rav Papa. Says Rav Papa, comparing one din to the other, what the one and the other, a din that we learn in Masechtas Nida, that aduma is that if the berries are red, it's just as bad as them being black, and it invalidates the hadas if there's more berries than leaves. Why are we comparing red to black if all Rav spoke about was black? Because the Amar Rab Chanina, if you remember in the beginning of Nida Daf Yutes, we learned about the 5 bloods. Nowadays, when the color of that which leaves the woman's body is reddish, we're going to say, she's a Nida. But really, we had a Masoid of only different shades of blood will render her into a Nida. And then the Mishnah, speaking out the different shades of red, adds a 5th, which is black. And as we learned over there, that it's not that black is a category for itself. That since when blood congeals, it turns black, so we link the red and the black together. So de facto, if there's a mara that's shachar, we're going to say the woman is an ida. As we learned over there, that haidam shachar, really it's only the red that makes her into an ida, but it's adam who ella shalaka, it deteriorated, it changed color. So just like we find in nida that there is a correlation halachically that we make between red and black, similarly, here, even though the great Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaGadol, spoke about black, we say the same thing. We're going now, fakert, we're going from black to red. How great is that? Chalpi Kabbalah, black is keser, and red is gevura. And the way we touch the highest level is through the holy gevura that we apply to ourselves. Okay, weiter. Imatam kosher. Now the Gemara is going to point out that the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah l'chayra could be resolved. On Amud Aleph we went flying to Chulin. How about focusing on our Mishnah? When it says in the Mishnah imiyatam kashem, so the question is dimiatinu emas. When exactly will one decrease the number of the black or red berries? And the Mishnah is writing that hadas now becomes good. If you decrease the berries before you put it in a bundle, then for that we don't need a Mishnah. It's before Yom Tov, it's before you bundled it, then pshit. Ella lebasa de la'agde. It must be that when you made the bundle wasn't kosher. Then you took amount the berries. So hold on. So dichui me'ikarohu. So why don't we resolve from our Mishnah the inquiry of Rabbi Yirmiyah? So here you have something that when you made it, it was not valid. Now you took away the problem. Well, if you would say the principle of permanent rejection, why would it be kosher? So tifshet mina, at least that dichui me'ikara is lo yahava dichui. Gavaldik. Says the Gemara lo oilam, I will tell you the case of the Mishnah is that one decreased the berries when basar de la'agde, after you bundle the lulav hadas and arav. However, let's not focus at all on the Tasav Eloi Min Ha'asri that we learned on Amud Aleph. What will we focus on? That Vukosavar Eged Hazmana Ba'alma. Dichui, my friends, means that there is a mitzvah now, but this item, when there is a chiyuv on me to do the mitzvah, cannot be used. It's rejected. If we say that yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs, then we would say, since when I was chayiv, that was unable to be used, that was not kosher enough to be used. If it's rejected, it remains rejected. Before Yom Tov, there's no chiyuv at all to take the arba minim. It only begins with Yom Tov. Now, the fact that you bundled it, and even if you need to bundle it, it's not yet. You only did something that's called a hazmana. In other words, you were preparing the bundle that when the chiyuv comes around, you have it ready. But it was never the time of a mitzvah yet. So there, perhaps, says the Gemara, is where we say that even though you already bundled it, but it's before Yom Tiv, you can still fix. And in our case, you can fix the hadas. But that doesn't at all clarify what were to happen if the time of the obligation, if the time of the mitzvah already came about. Here maybe again that if we would apply the principle of dichui, then we would say even if you decreased it, it's still not good. Eged is hazmana ba'alma. Gewaldig. And hazmana ba'alma is lav klumu. Beautiful. Let's look inside the Rashi, somehow middle of the narrow lines in the beginning of the line. Eged hazmana ba'alma. Ein agudasoi kriya shem liyois chal olav shem lulav pasal litchais. You can't call it when you did the binding or the bundling at pasal. You can't even use that word because before the time of Yom Tiv, before Yom Tiv, it's not yet anything. V'hilkach afilui dichui meikara ein kan. It wasn't even nitcha from the outset. Just to speak out right now, that there are two types of rejections. There was something that was never fit, that's called dichui meikara. And then there's something that's even worse, something that was fit, and after it was fit, it became rejected. That's called nida v'nitcha. Then it's even more likely that it will remain permanently rejected. Here Rashi says it's not even dichui meikara. When would you apply dichui meikara? It's very interesting. Rashi doesn't say that dichui meikara will mean from the morning of Sukkot. That's a very important Rashi. Dichui meikara means at least let the night of Yom Tov come in. Achi yekadosh olav hayoim. Even though, my friends, at night there is no, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of taking the lulav at night. But at least it's Yom Tov already. It's the time of the mitzvahs, not for this, there's the time of the chiyuv, and then there's the time that you can fulfill your chiyuv. Rashi understands that the moment that it's yikadosh olav hayoim, then there's already some sort of mitzvah connected to the bundle. V'oidene b'psulai, the kivan the matas zman mitzvah, if at least the night of Yom Tov would come in, so now it's the zman of the mitzvah, and v'loi chazilei, and if it would still be buried up, therefore unfit, that's called rejected. And then if we say yesh dichol eitzel mitzvahs, it will remain rejected. Avol mikama hache lav dichui hu. Beautiful. Back inside the Gemara. Okay. Avar ve'emematam b'Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah that you can't decrease it on Yom Tov. But here, let's go weiter. We're still going to focus on the whole dichui issue. Ha'avar ulakata. Now what does that imply? That if you did diminish it, even though we learned Amud Aleph Amachloikis Tanoim, our Tana ascribes to what? That it's kosher. You know why? You know how the Gemara knows that our Tana says that if you did decrease the berries, if you picked off the berries, it's kosher. I'll tell you why, Kevan. Because if our Tana would hold that even after picking the berries, for whatever reason, on Yom Tov, it's not going to be kosher, then why can't you pick the berries on Yom Tov? What's the problem of picking the berries? Is that you're being mesaken mana. Well, that means that if you did it, it's kosher. And here again, the ashchor emas. Well, now that we established above that the green berries are not a problem, okay, when were those berries black? When were they problematic? If they already became black before Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov came in, that hadas was invalid. So at least at least learn from our Mishnah that we do subscribe, right? Dichui meikarahu. So, if it's dichui meikara, and yet the Mishnah says that you can use it, it's kosher, because again, if it wouldn't be kosher, why can't you diminish it? Why can't you decrease it? So at least let us be poished from our Mishnah, Rabbi Yirmiyah's question that dichui meikara is not dichui. And guys, remember, just it's very important, if something was never fit to begin with, and then at a later point it becomes fit, to say that it's permanently rejected is something harder to say. Which is indeed, what should we, that if it was from the beginning not good, it's not permanently rejected. Which is why the Mishnah says you're not allowed to decrease it. Because decreasing it makes it kosher. Elolav, well, let's go that the Ashker b'Yom Tov, let's say, maybe, that when you bundled it, when Yom Tov came in, it was still green. It was taka kosher. Only after Yom Tov came in, then it turned black. That's called nira v'nitcha. Nira v'nitcha. So shamat mina, that even a bigger chiddush, that even when it's nira v'nitcha, if choizer v'nira, if you took away the invalidation, in our case you picked it, which you shouldn't have, it's kosher. So says the Gemara loy, that la'olam the ashker meikara. In order to minimize the chiddush over here, we're going to say the Mishnah's case was that it was black from the outset. Okay, and indeed, when Yom Tov came in, the dichui meikara, and the fact that the Mishnah says that you're not allowed to pick the berries, but if you pick the berries, it's ve'eim amatim b'Yom Tov. Again, ve'eim amatim b'Yom Tov already implies that if you picked it, it's kosher, because if not, you're not masaken mana. So we can now respond to the boya that we began today with the boya of Rabbi Yirmiyah. We see clearly deloi hava dichui. So we could resolve that part of the inquiry, that if there was dichui meikara by mitzvahs, for sure it's not always going to be rejected. That should mean no. But one part of the boya of Rabbi Yirmiyah remains open-ended. Aval nira v'nitcha, and then v'choyzed v'nira, that we don't know, because that's not the case of the Mishnah. So at least for this, in other words, when we learned on Amad Aleph Teku, what the Gemara did over here is the Gemara limited the question that remains standing, that if it was dichui me'ikara, by mitzvahs, no one says that it becomes permanently rejected.
If you eat grapes from a branch on Shabbat, is that allowed? They come in a, whatever that thing is called.
So Kevin is just asking, just to point it out, we're speaking about eating, that if you have a cluster of grapes, when the branch, when the vine is no longer connected, of course you can eat it on Shabbos. There's nothing wrong with it.
So why not in this case say you
So again, 1 second. I'm just pointing out that the issue of taking the berries off is not an issue of koitzed at all. It's only an issue that if this validates the hadas, which it does, then you're being mesaken mana. Now hold on. Tana Rabbanan. More. Ein mamatim b'Yom Tov. Let's go weiter. You're not allowed to decrease the berries on Yom Tov. Mishum, a new Tana, the final Tana. Mishum Rabbi Eliezer b'Rab Shimon, or Rabbi b'Rab Shimon. They quoted him by saying that lechatchila you are allowed to take the berries off and you'll make it kosher. Problem is that everyone knows that midrabanan, that should be called tikkun mana. You're fixing a utensil on Yom Tov. So Amar Ravashi, it must be that where does Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, when does he say that you are lechatchila allowed to be mema'atin only kigoin shalakatan lachila? It's when you took off those berries, your kavana was to eat them. That's called davar she'ein mischaven. You're not intending to fix the utensil. You are intending to eat. And Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon will hold like his father, like the Tanach Rab Shimon that holds that davar she'ein mischaven is not even problematic on a rabbinic level. Davar she'ein mischaven is mutter. That must be the explanation. Problem is that didn't we also not learn both from Abaye and from Rav? At the end, they all agreed, the Amri Tarvayu, that even the lenient Shita of Rab Shimon, of Davar She'ein Mischaven, that's only applicable if, when you intend to do A, which is permitted, the B Possibility is only a possibility. It wasn't something that certainly will happen. But in a case where doing one will for sure cause the other, and that's called psikresha, right? You want to give your child a ball to play with, a little ball, a kugele, and they used to use then the heads of a chicken. So you're not allowed to take life. You can't even draw blood. So if someone is going to cut off the head of the chicken by saying, my kavanah is not to kill the chicken, my kavanah is only to have something to play with for my kid. So even Shimon will hold that it's prohibited because the psikresha, what do you think, you're going to cut the head off and it's not going to die? So here also, why would picking the berries for eating be a solution? When you pick the berries, you make the hadas kosher. Let's use the words that we learned today, because taka, we don't say dichui me'ikara by mitzvahs. You are making it fit. So here, guys, this line is such an important line. Answers the Gemara. Hacha b'mayaskinen, that this Jew that picked the berries from the hadas to eat has another hoshana. Hoshana, as we keep on mentioning, is one of the names that we use in Chazal for the bundled lulav hadasim and aravis. Amazing. Guys, fixing a utensil, this is the klal over here. Fixing a utensil is only called fixing if you plan to use it, if you need to use it. If you don't need to use that which you are repairing, we're speaking about not physically fixing it, we're speaking about halachically fixing it. Right? You're not saying that I'm going to go ahead and build a house, but I'm not going to use it on Shabbos. No, that's not okay. But if a Jew has another bundle, and they were planning to use the other bundle that didn't have many berries, think about it. And then, the guy had a couple of sets, and one set, he knew it's not good because there's too many berries. And then Yom Tov morning for breakfast, he says, you know what, let me chop a bite, I love those berries. He picked it to eat. When he picked it, he did not need it. He did not need it. A big thing this. Our Gemara is saying, since he did not need it, even though it's psikresha, you can't call it tikkun mana because he's not fixing anything, he's not planning to use it. Now, if later he decides to use it, then it's okay. Look inside Rashi, 3 lines under the Gemara, in the wide lines. Loi tzricha de isleg oishana achrita. V'loi tzorech lahai. Rashi, hilkach ein kan tikkun keli. Why? Because the loi tzricha leila achshura. V'loi dama hashtala psikresha. Because over there you're taking out the neshama. That's the name of that malacha. But here there isn't tikkun keli. In other words, what makes your act of removing berries tikkun keli? There's no keli. It's about there's a mitzvah. And it's only if you need it. If you dafka don't need it, you don't need it, you have another one. It's not called tikkun keli at all. Wow. Okay, let's go back. Question now.
Quick question. If you violate the tikkun mana at that point, can you still use it or not?
So that's it's a couple of things we have to respond to. First of all, let's go with the principle that there's no mitzvah baba veda by an isur derabanan. Let's accept that. The next question will be is if the lulav needs to be bundled, so we call the bundling the making of the hoshana. And if we're going to apply the din of tasav eloim and ha'asoi also to the hoshana, right? If we will say A and say B, then we will still not be allowed to use it. But maybe b'chal you don't have to bundle it. If you don't need to bundle it, even if you were to say tasav eloim and ha'asoi, it's irrelevant. That's what we learned today. It's not so simple to invalidate it. But on the other hand, there are those who will hold that even though you didn't violate anything because you had another hoshana, it won't be valid. If you subscribe to the lulav tzarech eget, if you are makish lulav to the sukkah, tasav eloim and ha'asoi, and if you did it on Yom Tov, then you also won't be allowed to use it. That's what we learned today. Let's go weiter. I just want to say one nakuda. Now that the Gemara said the islei hoshana achrita, do you b'chlal have to say that Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon is only being lenient because he paskins like his father? L'chayda lav dafka. It's if we're saying that if you have another hoshana, it's not called, that's the words of Rashi, ein kan tikkun keli, then it has nothing to do with davar she'ein eschaven. The metzias will be is that you are intending to eat it, because why else would you do it? If you have another hoshana and you plan to use the other hoshana, why would you take off the berries? It is because you plan to eat it. but it's not connected to davar she'ein mischaven because you're doing nothing wrong at all. Okay. Tanach Rabbanan, the final sugya before the new Mishnah, before the dinim of the arava, what happens if you had a bundled lulav? This is very practical. It happens. You bundled your lulav, but the yeshiva bacher that did it didn't know what he was doing. And the rings that he made fell apart on Yom Tov. Chutar agodoy bi Yom Tov. We're not speaking about Chol HaMoed. We're speaking about it fell apart on Yom Tov. What's the issue? The issue is that we see from our Gemara that the minig was minig Chabad. They didn't have these little pockets or these little sleeves, what they call them. No, they had rings. And making such a ring is connected to the isur of making a knot on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, which one may not do. So says the Beraisa, okay, you can't make a proper knot. So now you have to tie it the way people tie vegetables together. They don't make a proper kesher. You know, when you tie vegetables, it's like a gartel. You just put something around and you tuck in the ends of the rope. So you're yoitze, the eged, without making a proper knot. So the Gemara wants to understand, hold on. Why did we have to only give a solution to bundle the three species, the way people bundle vegetables, which is not even making a bow, just wrapping a rope around it and then tucking it in, which is the weakest type of bundling? Why did we not at least say to make a bow? And if you remember the whole sugya we had in Shabbos by kesher, by a knot, so there's a proper double knot, and then there was the question whether making a bow is permitted or not, and that was a machlokes tanoim. Only Rabbi Yehuda says that a bow is like a knot. Why didn't we say to make a bow? Must be that our brisa is following the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that aniva, that making a bow is like making a kesher. But now we got ourselves a problem, because if it follows Rabbi Yehuda, guys, Rabbi Yehuda, we learned today on Amud Aleph, that's the ground zero, that's lulav tzarech eged. Tzarech eged means a proper knot. It means a Lubavitcher ring. The ones that my sons make. You have to really know what you're doing. You have to make it like a double knot. It doesn't fall apart. So if our Tana is Rabbi Yehuda, then eged ma'al yasaboyi, and why? Oh, that's the picture. And why would just bundling it the way people bundle vegetables, not even a bow? You know, you just wrap it around and you tuck it in. That's very flimsy. Why would that be good? So it must be that our Tana agrees with Rabbi Yehuda with one, which is why he doesn't suggest a bow. But on the other hand, he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. He doesn't hold that it needs to have eget. What does he hold? Like we learned today on Amud Aleph, that even the Rabbanan hold, because of Zeh Keli V'Anveyu, that lechatchila bundle it together. For the Zeh Keli V'Anveyu, on Yom Tiv, it's good enough to do something that's not shel kayama, but not a bow, because this Tana holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and that then a bow is already considered the kesher shel kayama. Bottom line is that when we make, first of all, God forbid to be, people have a minig that they put it in the sleeves, that's fine. But we who have a minig taka to use the rings, and kimin hagenu, that we have the three rings, that bind the hadassim and the aravas to the lulav, aside of the two other rings that are on the lulav itself, hidden by the other two species, that follows more. It's mashma over here that the lachatchila, at least the kesher, the binding, the ring should be something of a permanent nature, which you may not do on Yom Tov. However, we have another few minutes. Let's begin.
The holder, Rabbi, if you had that, you could probably assemble it on Yom Tov.
For sure, that's my whole point, that our Gemara is not following the types of sleeves that many people use today, because that's a non-issue. There's no kesher at all. There's no kesher at all. Very good. Says the Mishnah. So we went through lulav, we went hadas, now arava, and you see the formulation is very symmetrical. Says the Mishnah, arava, if you have what we call a willow stem, gzula, here it's in the feminine, right? Just to be medayik on that. So the lulav was hagazul v'hayavesh. By the hadas, that was yesterday, hagazul v'hayavesh. Here it's b'lashon nekev, arava, gzula v'yavesha, psula. And the same, everything we spoke about before applies over here. Similarly, if it is from an asherah or from a irani dachas, guys, remember, something that's destined to be burnt is viewed as if it's already burnt, and something that's already burnt has no shiur. Its measurement is pulverized. Katusei michta shiure. and therefore it's psula. Next case in the Mishnah, niktam roish, if the top of the arava is clipped off, or if nifritzu aleha, if the leaves are torn off, or v'hat saf tzafa, this is finally Epsanudin. Hat saf tzafa, as we'll see, are a type of willow. It's taka willow, but the leaves are round. They're not elongated as they have to be. Also, b'di'evid, psula. What about kemusha? Kemusha means it's withered, it's not fully dried. Or v'shenishru mixas olef, only the minority of the leaves fell off. So then, or v'shel baal, final din, baal, guys, means a field. In other words, the Torah says arvei nachal, literally it means the araves that grow by a brook of water. What happens if it didn't grow by a brook of water? It grew in a field. So for the last three, right, Kamusha, Shenishiru Mixas, and Baal Ksheda, and the Gemara is going to begin focusing on the Baal. The Torah says arvei nachal. So its location should be essential. It's not. Explains the Gemara. Tanach Rabbanan. In Pashas Emer, where it says arvei nachal. Arvei nachal means willows that grow by the brook. So says the Braisa Hagidelim al Hanachal. Rashi teaches it means, look inside the second to last line, that it's a mitzvah, it's a lechatchila to get those araves that actually grew by a brook of water. But even this Braisa, says Rashi, is not arguing with the Mishnah. The Braisa only means it's a din of lechatchila. Further in the Braisa, davar acher, that arvei nachal doesn't even mean the aravos that grow by a nachal. No, it means she'oleha shelo, that its leaves look like a nachal, mashuch kanachal. They're elongated and not rounded. They're not half tzaf tzafa. But a b'chlal doesn't mean that it came from a nachal. Tanya idach, we learned in another Braisa, arvei nachal, ein liyela arvei nachal. Clearly, here they should come from a brook. How do you know that if shel baal, if they grow in a field, or if they grow on mountains, minayin, that they are okay? So Talmud loimer arvei, why arvei b'loshen rabim? Arvei nachal means mikol makoim. Let's hop another line. Abba Shaul loimer, the top line in Daf Lamed Daled, that don't say, finally, he does not agree with the Tanach and the Braisa. The Torah uses a loshen rabim, not to be machshir aravis that grow in the baal. According to Abba Shaul, you have to get willows that actually grow by a nachal. Why did the Torah use a lashon rabim? The Torah is hinting to two mitzvahs that we do over Sukkot with aravos, one not related to the other. Arvei shtayim, it's about two different mitzvahs. One is the aravos that we put in the lulav, in the hoshana, in this binding, and the other is another mitzvah that we'll learn more about soon, are the aravos that we took in the Beis HaMikdash and we walked around the Mizbeach. And by the way, zecher, from that is where we have today what we call hoishanas. So that's the arvei. Now, why didn't the Chachamim learn arvei is to be meramas to the Mikdash? V'rabanan leMikdash minalahu, they dafka don't learn it from arvei. Hilchas gemiralahu. They consider this to be a bona fide halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and the definition of a halacha l'Moshe Sinai is something that doesn't even have a remez in the Torah. And indeed, Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yechanan, the din of Eser Netiyos. What's the din of Eser Netiyos? A field, my friend, must be left to lie fallow on the Shemitah. More than that, Mid'oiraisa, 30 days before Shemitah, one may not plow a field. That's Mid'oiraisa. However, also Mid'oiraisa, if you have a field that has saplings planted in a density that in every base saw you have 10 saplings or more. Being that it's very young trees, if you won't plow it, the trees will get ruined. Now, sometimes, so what? But the Torah, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that this added 30 days does not apply if you have Eser Netiyos. That's number one. Number two, what we are beginning to introduce is the din of a arava, meaning that in the Beis HaMikdash, aside of the Arbas Haminim, there was another time that we only took a arava and we walked around the Mizbeach, and the Nisuch Hamayim that was offered on the Mizbeach, in addition to the Nisach Hayayin, all of that is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and therefore arvei cannot allude to that. And adarabah, the word arvei is used, like our Mishnah, to say that even shel baal, even shel harim is going to be a kosher arava to be continued.